The dust cloud rolled through the streets of La Junta, Colorado, as Adelaide Oliver stumbled backward, her worn carpetbag hitting the wooden planks with a thud that echoed her desperation. It was August 1878, and the sun blazed mercilessly overhead while the hotel manager crossed his arms and glared down at her from the entrance. "I told you, miss, no money means no room," he said, his voice carrying down the street where curious onlookers had begun to gather. "Should have thought about that before you came to town with empty pockets." Adelaide's cheeks burned with humiliation as she pushed herself to her feet, brushing the dirt from her already travel-stained skirt. "Please, I can work. I can clean rooms, help in the kitchen, anything." "We don't need help. We need paying customers." The manager turned his back and disappeared inside, the door slamming shut with a finality that made Adelaide's stomach twist. She stood there on the boardwalk, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on her. 3 weeks ago, she had left Kansas City with enough money sewn into her petticoat to last a month, maybe 2 if she was careful. She had been traveling to meet her brother in Denver, the only family she had left after their parents had died from influenza the previous winter. But somewhere between Kansas City and La Junta, her bag had been stolen while she slept on the train. Everything was gone except the clothes on her back and the empty carpetbag that now held only a spare chemise and stockings. The train conductor had put her off in La Junta when she couldn't pay for the rest of the journey. That had been yesterday morning. She had spent last night sleeping behind the general store, curled up against the building, jumping at every sound. Now, after walking the town all day trying to find work, she had finally scraped together enough coins from odd jobs to afford one night in a proper bed. But the hotel manager had taken one look at her disheveled appearance and demanded payment up front. When she had counted out the coins, she had come up 30 cents short. Adelaide picked up her bag and tried to hold her head high as she walked away from the hotel. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. She had maybe 2 hours before darkness fell, and she had no idea where she would spend the night. The thought of another evening behind the general store made her want to cry, but she refused to break down in the middle of the street. "Excuse me, miss." The voice was deep and steady, with a hint of Texas in the drawl. Adelaide turned to find a man standing a few feet away, his hat in his hands. He was tall, with dark hair that curled slightly at the ends and eyes the color of coffee. A bandana was tied loosely around his neck, and his worn leather vest and chaps marked him clearly as a cowboy. He looked to be in his mid-20s, perhaps 26 or 27. "I don't mean to intrude," he continued, his expression serious but kind. "But I couldn't help overhearing your conversation with the hotel manager. I'm Jesse Crawford, and I'd like to help if you'll allow it." Adelaide instinctively took a step back. She had learned in the past 3 weeks that kindness from strangers often came with expectations she wasn't willing to meet. "I don't need charity, Mr. Crawford. I'm not offering charity, madam. I'm offering basic human decency." He gestured toward the hotel. "Let me pay for a room for you. Rest tonight. Tomorrow, things might look different." "I can't accept that," Adelaide said, though her resolve was already weakening. The thought of a real bed of safety and privacy was almost overwhelming. "I have no way to repay you." Jesse studied her for a moment, and Adelaide had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through her exhausted defenses. "You look like you haven't had a decent meal or a good night's sleep in days. I'm not asking for repayment. Sometimes people just need help, and there's no shame in accepting it." Adelaide wanted to argue, wanted to maintain her pride and independence, but her body was betraying her, swaying slightly from exhaustion and hunger. She hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon when a kind woman at the bakery had given her a day-old roll. Her throat was tight with unshed tears, and she was so tired she could barely think straight. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because someone did it for me once when I needed it," Jesse said simply. "And because it's the right thing to do." Before Adelaide could respond, Jesse turned and walked into the hotel. She stood frozen on the boardwalk, uncertain whether to follow or run. But her feet seemed to have made the decision for her, carrying her slowly toward the entrance. By the time she stepped inside, Jesse was already at the front desk, placing coins on the counter. The hotel manager's expression had transformed from dismissive to obsequious. "Yes, Mr. Crawford, of course. Room 7, upstairs, second door on the left. Very comfortable, very clean." Jesse took the key and turned to Adelaide. "It's yours for the night. There's a restaurant 2 doors down that serves a good supper. Tell them to put it on my tab." Adelaide took the key with trembling fingers. "Mr. Crawford, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, just rest tonight." He placed his hat back on his head and tipped it slightly in her direction. "Good evening, Miss Oliver. Adelaide Oliver." "Good evening, Miss Oliver. I hope things improve for you soon." With that, he walked out of the hotel, leaving Adelaide standing in the lobby with tears streaming down her face and a key clutched in her hand. The room was small but clean, just as the manager had promised. There was a bed with a real mattress, a washstand with a pitcher of water, and a window that looked out over the main street. Adelaide locked the door behind her and sank onto the bed, finally allowing herself to cry. She cried for her parents, for her stolen belongings, for the fear and exhaustion of the past weeks. But she also cried with relief, because for one night at least, she was safe. After washing her face and hands, Adelaide ventured out to the restaurant Jesse had mentioned. The owner, a large woman with kind eyes, nodded when Adelaide gave Jesse his name and brought her a plate of beef stew with fresh bread and butter. Adelaide ate slowly, savoring every bite while the restaurant filled with the evening crowd. She was finishing her meal when Jesse walked in with another man, both of them dusty from the trail. They took a table near the window, and Adelaide watched them for a moment, wondering about the cowboy who had shown her such unexpected kindness. He was laughing at something his companion said, his face transformed by genuine amusement. Adelaide realized he was quite handsome when he smiled. As if sensing her gaze, Jesse looked up and met her eyes. He nodded politely, and Adelaide felt her cheeks flush as she quickly looked away. She finished her meal and hurried back to the hotel, where she fell into bed and slept more soundly than she had in weeks. Morning came too soon, bringing with it the reality of her situation. Adelaide had one night of safety, but now she was back where she had started, with no money and no prospects. She dressed carefully, doing her best to look presentable, and ventured downstairs to return the key. Jesse was sitting in the lobby, his hat resting on his knee. He stood when he saw her, and Adelaide's heart skipped in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Good morning, Miss Oliver. I hope you slept well." "I did, thank you. Better than I have in a long time." Adelaide held out the key. "I want to thank you again for your kindness, Mr. Crawford." "I won't forget it." "I was hoping to have a word with you if you have a moment," Jesse said. "Would you join me for breakfast?" Adelaide hesitated, but her empty stomach made the decision for her. "That would be lovely, thank you." They walked to the restaurant together, and Adelaide was acutely aware of the curious glances they received. In a town the size of La Junta, a stranger was always cause for speculation, and Adelaide imagined the gossip that would spread about the mysterious woman who had been thrown out of the hotel, only to be rescued by Jesse Crawford. Over coffee and eggs, Jesse explained that he worked for a ranch about 10 miles outside of town. The owner, Mrs. Catherine Sullivan, is a widow who runs the place with her 2 sons. She's been looking for someone to help with the household work. The ranch is successful, but Mrs. Sullivan isn't as young as she used to be, and she could use an extra pair of hands. The pay isn't much, but it includes room and board, and Mrs. Sullivan is a fair employer. Adelaide set down her coffee cup, hardly daring to hope. "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Crawford?" "I'm offering to introduce you to Mrs. Sullivan. Whether she hires you is up to her, but I think you'd be a good fit." Jesse met her eyes steadily. "I can tell you're educated and well-bred, Miss Oliver. Whatever circumstances brought you to La Junta, I don't think you're the kind of person to take advantage of anyone's generosity, and I think you'd work hard for a chance to get back on your feet." "I would," Adelaide said fervently. "I absolutely would. But why are you doing this?" "You don't know me." Jesse was quiet for a moment, his expression growing distant. 5 years ago, I was 17 and alone. My parents had died, and I had nothing but the clothes on my back and a half-wild horse. I came through La Junta looking for work, and Mrs. Sullivan took a chance on me. She gave me a job when I had no experience, taught me everything I know about ranching, and treated me like family. I figure I owe it to her and to the world to pass that kindness along when I can. Adelaide felt warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in months. "When can we leave?" "This morning, if you're ready. I need to pick up some supplies and then we can ride out to the ranch." "I don't have a horse," Adelaide said, reality crashing back down. "You can ride with me. It's not fancy, but it'll get us there." An hour later, Adelaide found herself sitting behind Jesse on his horse, her arms wrapped around his waist as they left La Junta behind. She tried not to notice how solid he felt, how his presence made her feel safe for the first time since leaving Kansas City. The morning air was cool, and the landscape stretched out endlessly in all directions, broken only by occasional clusters of cottonwood trees and the distant purple smudge of mountains on the horizon. "Tell me about yourself, Miss Oliver," Jesse said as they rode. "If you don't mind my asking." Adelaide rested her cheek against his back, too tired to maintain proper distance. "I'm 22 years old, from Kansas City originally. My parents died last winter, and I've been trying to reach my brother in Denver. He's a surveyor for the railroad. I had enough money for the journey, but my bag was stolen on the train." "That's rough luck," Jesse said sympathetically. "Have you been able to send word to your brother?" "I sent a telegram from La Junta yesterday, but I haven't received a response yet. I'm hoping he'll send money once he knows where I am, but it could take weeks." "Well, you'll have a safe place to wait at the Sullivan Ranch. Mrs. Sullivan will make sure you're taken care of." They rode in companionable silence for a while, and Adelaide found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's movement. The sun climbed higher, warming the air, and Adelaide could see cattle grazing in the distance. "What about you, Mr. Crawford?" she asked. "Do you have family?" "Just the Sullivans now. They're the closest thing to family I've had in a long time." There was a note of contentment in his voice that made Adelaide smile. "Mrs. Sullivan's sons, Thomas and Michael, are good men. Thomas is 28 and runs the business side of things. Michael is 25 and handles most of the ranch work. You'll like them." The Sullivan Ranch appeared on the horizon like a mirage, a collection of buildings clustered around a main house. As they drew closer, Adelaide could see corrals with horses, a large barn, and several smaller outbuildings. The main house was 2 stories, built of wood that had weathered to a soft gray, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. A woman emerged from the house as they approached, shading her eyes with her hand. She was perhaps in her late 50s, with gray-streaked brown hair pulled back in a bun and a dress covered by a practical apron. Her face lit up when she saw Jesse. "Jesse Crawford, you're back earlier than I expected," she called out. "And you've brought a guest." Jesse dismounted and helped Adelaide down, steadying her when her legs wobbled from the long ride. "Mrs. Sullivan, this is Miss Adelaide Oliver. I was hoping you might have a moment to speak with her about the position you mentioned." Mrs. Sullivan's sharp eyes took in Adelaide's appearance, from her dusty dress to her tired face, but there was no judgment in her expression. "Of course. Come inside, dear. You look like you could use something cold to drink." The interior of the house was cool and welcoming, with comfortable furniture and curtains that filtered the harsh sunlight. Mrs. Sullivan led them to a large kitchen where a pie was cooling on the counter, filling the air with the scent of apples and cinnamon. "Sit down, both of you," Mrs. Sullivan commanded, already pouring glasses of cold water. "Now, Miss Oliver, Jesse seems to think you might be interested in helping me run this household. Why don't you tell me a bit about yourself?" Adelaide repeated the story she had told Jesse, and Mrs. Sullivan listened intently, her expression growing increasingly sympathetic. "You've had quite an ordeal, my dear. I'm sorry for your troubles." "I'm just grateful for the opportunity to work, Mrs. Sullivan. I'm a hard worker and I learn quickly. I can cook, clean, and I'm good with accounts if you need help with that. I'll do whatever you need." "Can you handle living on a ranch?" Mrs. Sullivan asked. "It's not like city life. We're 10 miles from town and sometimes we don't make it in for weeks at a time. It can be lonely." "I think I'd prefer the peace and quiet," Adelaide admitted, "and I'm not afraid of hard work or isolation." Mrs. Sullivan smiled. "Then I think we'll get along just fine. The job is yours if you want it. You'll have your own room, 3 meals a day, and $10 a month. I'll expect you to help with cooking, cleaning, laundry, and general household management. Sometimes you might need to help with the garden or the chickens. Does that sound acceptable?" "It sounds perfect," Adelaide said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan. You won't regret this." "I'm sure I won't." Mrs. Sullivan patted Adelaide's hand. "Now, let me show you to your room so you can settle in. Jesse, would you bring Miss Oliver's bag?" The room was small but comfortable, with a bed, a dresser, and a window that overlooked the corral. Adelaide stood in the doorway, hardly believing her luck. Just yesterday, she had been sleeping behind a building with no prospects. Now she had a job, a safe place to live, and the kindness of strangers who were quickly becoming something more than that. "Thank you," she said to Jesse, who had set her meager bag on the bed, "for everything. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "Just be happy," Jesse said. "That's payment enough." He tipped his hat and left, closing the door softly behind him. Adelaide sank onto the bed and allowed herself a moment of pure relief. Then she unpacked her few belongings, washed her face, and went downstairs to begin her new life. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Adelaide rose early to help Mrs. Sullivan prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, then spent her mornings cleaning, doing laundry, or working in the vegetable garden. The afternoons were often spent mending clothes, preserving food, or helping Mrs. Sullivan with whatever needed doing. The work was hard, but it was honest, and Adelaide found satisfaction in falling into bed each night exhausted but content. She met Thomas and Michael Sullivan within the first few days. Thomas was serious and business-minded, with his mother's sharp intelligence and a tendency to worry about every detail of the ranch's operation. Michael was more easygoing, quick to laugh, and always ready with a joke. Both men treated Adelaide with respect and made her feel welcome. But it was Jesse who occupied her thoughts more than she wanted to admit. She saw him every day at meals, and often throughout the day as he went about his work. He was patient with the younger ranch hands, skilled with horses, and seemed to know instinctively what needed to be done without being told. Adelaide noticed the way Mrs. Sullivan watched him with obvious affection, the way Thomas sought his opinion on ranch matters, and the way Michael joked with him like a brother. 3 weeks after Adelaide arrived at the ranch, she was hanging laundry when Jesse approached, leading a pretty sorrel mare. "Miss Oliver, I was wondering if you might like to learn to ride," he said. "This is Honey. She's as gentle as they come, and I thought you might enjoy being able to explore the ranch a bit." Adelaide wiped her hands on her apron, eyeing the horse nervously. "I've never ridden before." "That's why I'm offering to teach you." Jesse's eyes were warm with encouragement. "Come on, it'll be good for you to have a skill like this." Over the next several weeks, Jesse spent his spare time teaching Adelaide to ride. At first she was terrified, clutching the saddle horn with white knuckles while Jesse led Honey around the corral. But gradually, she gained confidence, learning to post at a trot and eventually to canter. Jesse was a patient teacher, never making her feel foolish when she made mistakes, always there to catch her when she lost her balance. As the summer heat gave way to the cooler days of autumn, Adelaide realized she was falling in love. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, but rather a slow, steady awareness that grew stronger each day. She loved the way Jesse's eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the way he always held doors open for her, the way he listened when she talked as if every word mattered. She loved his quiet strength, his kindness to animals, his loyalty to the Sullivan family. But Adelaide had no idea if Jesse felt the same way. He was always polite and friendly, but he maintained a respectful distance that made it impossible to read his true feelings. Sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret, but he always looked away before she could be sure. One evening in late September, Adelaide was sitting on the porch after supper, enjoying the cool evening air. The sky was ablaze with color and the distant mountains were silhouetted against the fading light. Jesse came out and sat beside her, his hat in his hands. "Beautiful evening," he said. "It is," Adelaide agreed. "I never get tired of the sunsets here." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. Finally, Jesse spoke. "Adelaide, can I ask you something?" It was the first time he had used her first name, and the intimacy of it made her heart race. "Of course." "Have you heard from your brother?" Adelaide had received a letter 2 weeks ago. Her brother had sent money and urged her to continue on to Denver as soon as possible. She had been avoiding thinking about it, not ready to leave the ranch or the people who had become so important to her. "I have," she admitted. "He wants me to come to Denver." "Are you going to go?" Adelaide turned to look at Jesse, studying his profile in the fading light. "I don't know. I have a life here now. A job I enjoy, people I care about. I'm not sure I want to leave." Jesse met her eyes, and the intensity in his gaze took her breath away. "I don't want you to leave either." "You don't?" "No." Jesse set his hat aside and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "Adelaide, I've been trying to maintain proper distance, trying not to presume anything. But the truth is, I've been in love with you since the day I watched you pick yourself up off that boardwalk in La Junta. You were exhausted and humiliated and scared, but you held your head high. You've got more courage in your little finger than most men I know." Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes. "Jesse, I've been in love with you for weeks. I was afraid you only saw me as someone you helped, someone who needed rescuing." "You didn't need rescuing," Jesse said firmly. "You needed a hand up, and you've proven every day since that you're more than capable of taking care of yourself. You're strong and smart and kind, and I can't imagine this place without you in it." He leaned closer, and Adelaide closed the distance between them, their lips meeting in a kiss that was both gentle and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, Adelaide was breathless and dizzy with happiness. "I'm not going to Denver," she said. "What about your brother?" "I'll write to him and explain. He'll understand." Adelaide squeezed Jesse's hand. "My home is here now. With you." Jesse kissed her again, and Adelaide felt the last piece of her broken heart click into place. She had come to La Junta with nothing, had been thrown out into the street with no money and no hope. But that moment of desperation had led her to Jesse, to this ranch, to this life. Sometimes the worst moments open doors to the best possibilities. They sat on the porch long after the sun had set, talking about their hopes and dreams, making plans for a future together. Jesse told her about his parents, about growing up poor in Texas, about the loneliness of losing everyone he loved. Adelaide shared stories about her childhood in Kansas City, about her parents' loving marriage, about her hopes of one day having a family of her own. "I want to marry you, Adelaide," Jesse said as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. "I know it's fast, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life." "Yes," Adelaide said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." Jesse pulled her close, and Adelaide rested her head on his shoulder, feeling more at peace than she had since her parents died. She had found not just a home, but a partner, a love that would sustain her through whatever challenges life might bring. They told Mrs. Sullivan the next morning, and she embraced them both with tears of joy. "I knew it from the moment Jesse brought you home," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I could see it in the way he looked at you. I'm so happy for you both." Thomas and Michael were equally delighted, shaking Jesse's hand and kissing Adelaide's cheek. The entire ranch seemed to celebrate with them, and Adelaide marveled at how quickly this place had become her family. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in La Junta. Adelaide wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Sullivan had helped her make, and Jesse looked impossibly handsome in a new suit. The Sullivan family attended, along with several ranch hands and townspeople, who had come to know Adelaide through her occasional trips to town with Mrs. Sullivan. As they stood before the minister and exchanged vows, Adelaide thought about the journey that had brought her here. The loss, the fear, the desperation of that day when she had been thrown out of the hotel with no money and no hope. And then Jesse, appearing like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known how to pray, saying those simple words that had changed everything. "Rest tonight." That one night of rest had turned into a lifetime of love. After the ceremony, they held a celebration at the ranch. Mrs. Sullivan had prepared a feast, and there was music and dancing late into the night. Adelaide danced with Jesse under the stars, his arms around her waist, her head resting against his chest, and she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Jesse had built them a small house on the far side of the ranch, a wedding gift from the Sullivans. It was cozy and well made, with 2 rooms downstairs and a loft upstairs. Adelaide filled it with curtains and quilts, making it into a home, while Jesse added little touches like a rocking chair on the porch and shelves for Adelaide's growing collection of books. Their first winter together was harsh, with snow that piled high against the windows and winds that howled through the night. But inside their little house, wrapped in quilts and each other's arms, Adelaide had never felt warmer or safer. Jesse was an attentive husband, always thoughtful, always making her laugh even on the hardest days. In the spring, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with both joy and terror, memories of her own mother's difficult pregnancies making her anxious. But Jesse was steadfast in his support, holding her when she was sick, rubbing her swollen feet, talking to their unborn child through her expanding belly. Mrs. Sullivan proved to be an invaluable source of wisdom and comfort, sharing her own experiences and assuring Adelaide that she would be a wonderful mother. Michael's wife, Emma, whom he had married the previous fall, was also pregnant, and the two women bonded over their shared experience. On a warm day in October, almost exactly 2 years after Adelaide had been thrown out of the hotel in La Junta, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him James William Crawford, and Jesse cried when he held his son for the first time, overcome with love and gratitude. Adelaide watched her husband cradle their child, and she thought about all the ways her life had changed. She had gone from having nothing to having everything that mattered. A husband who loved her, a son who depended on her, a family that embraced her, and a home that welcomed her. Over the years that followed, Adelaide and Jesse's family grew. 2 years after James was born, they welcomed a daughter, Catherine, named after Mrs. Sullivan. Then came another son, Robert, and finally another daughter, Grace. Their little house became too small, and with the help of Thomas and Michael, Jesse built an addition that doubled the size of their home. The children grew up running wild on the ranch, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with chores and playing with their cousins. James showed an early aptitude for working with horses, just like his father. Catherine was quiet and studious, always with her nose in a book. Robert was the adventurer, always getting into scrapes and needing to be rescued. Grace was the peacemaker, able to charm her way out of any trouble. Adelaide continued to help Mrs. Sullivan with the household, though as the older woman aged, Adelaide gradually took over more of the responsibilities. When Mrs. Sullivan passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 72, Adelaide grieved deeply for the woman who had given her a chance when she had nothing. Thomas took over full management of the ranch, with Michael and Jesse as his partners. The ranch prospered under their care, and they added more land and cattle with each passing year. Jesse proved to have a gift for breeding horses, and the Crawford horses became sought after throughout Colorado. Adelaide started a small school on the ranch, teaching not just her own children but those of the ranch hands and neighboring families. She loved watching young minds discover the joy of learning, and she took pride in the fact that every child who passed through her schoolroom left knowing how to read and write and calculate. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jesse surprised Adelaide with a trip back to La Junta. They rode into town together, just as they had that first day, though this time Adelaide had her own horse. They visited the hotel where Adelaide had been thrown out, and Jesse insisted they rent the same room he had paid for that night. "I want to make new memories here," he said. "Good ones to replace the bad." They spent the evening walking through town, Jesse's arm around her waist, pointing out how things had changed. The town had grown with new buildings and more people. But the restaurant where they had shared breakfast was still there, and they ate there again, laughing at how nervous they had both been. That night, lying in the hotel room, Adelaide traced her fingers over Jesse's face. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Spending your money on a desperate stranger. Your life would have been simpler without me." Jesse caught her hand and kissed her palm. "My life would have been empty without you. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Adelaide. That money I spent was the best investment I ever made." "I love you," Adelaide whispered. "I love you too, always." The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. They lost Thomas to a sudden heart attack when he was only 50, and the entire ranch mourned him. But they also celebrated as their children grew and started families of their own. James married a sweet girl from town and started his own horse breeding operation on land adjacent to the ranch. Catherine became a teacher in Denver, though she came home often to visit. Robert joined the railroad as a surveyor, following in his uncle's footsteps. Grace married Michael's youngest son, keeping the family close. Adelaide and Jesse grew old together, their hair turning gray, their faces lined with years of laughter and hard work. They spent their evenings on the porch of their house, holding hands and watching the sunset, just as they had done as newlyweds. One evening, when they were both well into their 60s, Adelaide turned to Jesse and said, "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" "When you paid for my hotel room, rest tonight," Jesse said, the memory as clear as if it had happened yesterday. "Those 2 words changed my life," Adelaide said softly. "They gave me hope when I had none. They led me to you, to this life, to all of this." She gestured at the ranch spread out before them, at their grandchildren playing in the yard, at the home they had built together. "Those 2 words brought me everything I ever wanted to," Jesse said, "because they brought me you." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. The evening was peaceful, filled with the sounds of family and home. Adelaide thought about that frightened girl who had been thrown out onto the dusty street of La Junta with no money and no prospects. She had been so scared, so certain her life was over, but it had just been beginning. That moment of desperation had been the doorway to everything good in her life. The humiliation and fear had led her to Jesse, to love, to a family and a home and a life richer than she had ever imagined possible. "Thank you," Adelaide said, squeezing Jesse's hand. "For what?" "For seeing something worth saving in a desperate stranger, for giving me a chance, for loving me." Jesse lifted her hand to his lips. "Thank you for being brave enough to accept help, for staying, for building this life with me." They kissed as the last rays of sunlight faded. 2 people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and had built something beautiful together. Their love had weathered every storm, overcome every obstacle, and grown stronger with each passing year. As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge, Adelaide and Jesse went inside their home, surrounded by the evidence of their life together. Photographs of their children and grandchildren lined the walls. Quilts Adelaide had made covered the furniture. Jesse's handmade furniture filled every room. It was a home built on love and faith and the courage to trust in kindness. That night, as they lay in bed together, Adelaide thought about all the nights that had followed that first one in the La Junta Hotel. Thousands of nights, each one a gift, each one bringing them closer together. She fell asleep in Jesse's arms, just as she had for over 40 years, grateful for every moment, every memory, every beautiful day of the life they had created together. The Wild West had been hard and unforgiving, full of danger and uncertainty. But it had also been the setting for their love story, a testament to the fact that sometimes the worst moments led to the best possibilities. Adelaide had been thrown out with nothing, and Jesse had offered her rest. That simple act of kindness had blossomed into a love that had sustained them through decades, that had created a family, that had built a legacy. Years later, when they were both gone and their children gathered to sort through their belongings, they found letters Adelaide and Jesse had written to each other during the rare times they were apart. The letters were filled with love and longing, with everyday details and grand declarations, with the intimate language of 2 people who had chosen each other and never looked back. But it was the last letter Adelaide had written, found tucked into her Bible, that made her children cry. It was addressed to Jesse, written in her shaky handwriting just weeks before her death. "My dearest Jesse, when I think of my life, I think of that day in La Junta when I had lost everything. I was standing on that boardwalk, humiliated and afraid, and then you appeared. You were my angel, my savior, my home. You gave me rest that night, and you gave me peace every night after. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, for helping me when I was helpless, for loving me when I was lost. You were the answer to every prayer, the fulfillment of every dream. I have loved you with everything in me, and I will love you beyond this life and into whatever comes next. Rest tonight, my love, knowing that you made one desperate girl's life into something magical. Your Adelaide, always and forever. Their children made sure that Adelaide and Jesse were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their headstones simple but meaningful. Jesse is Reed. He gave rest to the weary. Adelaide's Reed. She found home in his heart. And there they remained, two souls who had found each other in the dust and heat of a Colorado town, who had built a love that lasted a lifetime, who had proven that kindness could change everything. That one moment of compassion could ripple out into generations of love and family and life. The Crawford Ranch continued to thrive, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own chapter to the family story. But it had all started with a desperate woman, a kind cowboy, and two simple words: rest tonight. Those words had been the beginning of everything, the first chapter of a love story that would be told and retold for generations. A reminder that sometimes the darkest moments come right before the light breaks through.